Hey, and welcome to Finlos Loves. I'm happy to welcome back Eva, who brings her knowledge and experience as co-host for this series about the 5 love languages. Whether on social media or in pop culture, it seems as if these 5 methods of giving and receiving love have become a near ubiquitous shorthand for discussing personal tastes in people and determining potential compatibility in relationships. This is a long and detailed conversation which will be broken into segments, the first of which gives an overview of the origins of the 5 love languages, as well as some new and emerging models exploring how we express love to one another. I'm always excited for these conversations because Eva is such a thoughtful and engaging human, and I always uncover ways in which we still have room to grow. When we started this podcast, we were dedicated to ensuring that the versions of us you hear in each episode are honest representations of the people we are in our lives and in our relationship. As such, we are evolving people with evolving ideas that reflect new experiences and knowledge acquired over time. The people we are now are not the same as the people we were decades ago when we first started this relationship, or even when we started this podcast. This is a show about communication, both how we express communication and how we receive communication from others, because, as with all parts of any relationship, good and effective communication is reciprocal. We hope you enjoy listening.
Well, we've been busy.
We have been busy.
So busy.
Yeah.
Good things. Changes.
Lots of changes. And some no changes. And that's okay.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But we're exploring and we're trying new things and we're being brave and we're
Yeah, and this
stretching.
is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is exciting. I think one of the things that we're trying is like just soliciting feedback, right, from folks and
Sure.
trying to get ideas.
Yeah, and this one
Yeah. That's what I wanted to do, is start with that gratitude.
Yeah, we a friend, Vanessa, when we first started doing these Finlos Loves episodes, was an early listener, and she said that I think we had mentioned in passing something about the 5 love languages,
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, I really want to hear more about that because it's something that I'm interested in and curious about. And so we've been not sitting on it. Eva's a researcher. And
I am.
Eva likes to have all her ducks in a row, to use the cliche.
Or rather than researcher, maybe just like I like to know the information. I like to have information.
Right.
Right.
And just because something is ubiquitous and common knowledge doesn't mean it's always right or well researched or valid. And I think that we don't also want to be advocating for or validating things that might not necessarily have all of the origin story, so to speak, might not be all that people know it is.
So it's about how do we do the least amount of harm possible, and how do we look at harm doing and who it harms, and kind of go from there.
Right. And it's kind of scary because when you think about how many people talk about their love language, we've talked about our love languages
We have.
for years.
We have, yeah. And this was really great because I think just like grounding into that gratitude, just like you said, for the curiosity
Mm-hmm.
and courage to ask for a topic like this from your friend Vanessa, and also just gratitude for her and the support and friendship that she's provided you for the last couple of years. And so
Mhm.
it's like, even there, right? Like when we want, like, this is a gift of our time to people. And sometimes it's a gift of time that's it's reciprocating the time that people spend with us,
Mhm.
right? And so here we are talking about a natural way of being in community with one another that is a way to show love.
Right. Yeah.
But why does that have to have specific language that puts it inside of a box?
It is something that we've even from the very, I'm trying to even like I'm trying to create our timeline for
with like understanding the love
right,
languages.
and I
It's because it was really big in the marriage
yes,
therapy world.
yes, but even before that, which we should talk about that, but even before that, I think of things in terms of like eras or epochs of time, and I think we were in our old house, which
Mhm.
is over 10 years ago now,
Yeah.
when we first kind of caught wind of love languages. And I think that even 10 years ago for us is still pretty deep into our relationship. I believe 10 years ago we were 10 or 11 or 12 years in already.
Yeah.
And I think like with all relationships, especially long-term relationships, we were starting to encounter some problematic patterns in our
Mhm.
communication, some difficulties with intimacy, difficulties
Mhm.
with with communicating clearly our needs in the relationship. And so I think that having such a concise, and it is really super concise and short and basic and sweet and easy to grasp, having this sort of paint by numbers language to
Mhm.
describe a relationship can be very appealing because it's easy.
Yeah, it gives people a sense of agency
Yeah,
and
and a sense of
control.
control, right?
Yes, more
Because it's
importantly.
like because we were just discussing this yesterday in terms of poetry, but feelings are hard,
Mhm.
and um, it's
That's why we like to hand you the color wheel, the emotions
r-
color wheel.
right.
Basically.
Which even that is
Love to
is
figure
is
out
is
where
very
you are.
complex. I mean, there's
Yeah.
dozens and dozens of different emotions that you can describe, but even that's
Right.
sort of like a very discrete gradation of emotions. Um, because like what happens when you're feeling sad and angry and happy all at the same time? Like that's
Right? That's the whole inside out concept, right? I
yeah.
love that movie for illustrating that.
Yep.
Yeah.
But when you're in a rut, and when we, and I should not say the second person like ambiguous you, when we were in
Mhm.
a rut, um having a way to talk, then, and a way to start to find connection, I think was really appealing. And so I think before we proceed, because we're gonna kind of really go deep into this, I think,
Mhm.
and we're going to talk about its
Mhm.
history, the five love languages history, its creator, the good and the bad and the ugly of it.
Mhm.
But I do want to give credit where credit is due. Like, it is a
Mhm.
tool that has helped people, including us.
Yeah.
And I think that if nothing else, I think that is worthy of something. Um, but like all things, it's a starting point, and it's
Yes.
really important to understand that all tools have their weaknesses and their strengths and their limitations, and this is a very limited tool. Because right
Mhm.
away, so what are the five love languages in the basic terminology?
Right. Yeah. So we're gonna jump. So we're skipping a little bit ahead, but the five love languages are, and you're gonna help me count them out here, because
Mhm.
all right, physical love,
Physical love.
which can, generally speaking, can include like snuggling, cuddling, that
Right.
kind of thing. However, in the original, it was looking really at physical intimacy and seemed to be almost exclusively about
About
sex.
sex.
So cuddling, yes, but in the context of post sex or
But I'm sorry to cut you off.
no,
I was just curious, like, for us, I think that I think anything that might yield that sort of oxytocin release
anything with that oxytocin release. Yeah.
is physical touch.
Yeah. Yeah. Physical time, physical touch, time together,
Quality time together.
which again, like for some people, quality time together might also
Right.
include
I think of
physical touch.
intimate time as being damn good quality time too.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but
Exactly.
I can see how some people in their relationship, they're not emotionally close to a person, and they just
Yeah.
want the physicality of it.
Yeah.
So immediately, just with these two types of love language, we're seeing how there's overlap, and it's already kind of messy.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Gifts.
Yeah, that's your favorite.
Um, I have a complicated, and I'll talk about that later.
When I
But
said Eva's favorite, it's not Eva's favorite. Obviously.
it's definitely not my favorite. Like it's low on my list, but it just depends.
Yeah.
Depends. Gifts is a good one to talk about too.
Okay, we'll get there.
Yeah, and also then how like the complexity of human nature and who people are impacts what's considered a gift, what's not considered a gift.
Right.
You know. So we said gifts, time together, physical.
Mm-hmm.
We've got
Words of affirmation. Yeah.
Yes.
That's. Yeah, I want to talk about lots of different things. We're gonna get there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And acts of service.
Acts of service.
Yes.
Which apparently, so as a for example, today I made something for you.
Yes.
Is that an act of service or a gift?
Is
Nuh-uh,
both.
it's one or the other. It's one of the love languages, right?
I know. Yes.
This is where it gets hard.
I guess it depends on whether I consider it an act of service or not, or
right,
or a gift or not.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are the 5, and right away I remember us sitting and talking about it, and you know, for me, physical intimacy and touch is super, super important. But that doesn't necessarily always mean like sex or something like that. Like that is not the driving impetus for me. It's really about being like, there's nothing more like physically pleasurable for me than just like being in immediate contact with you, like falling asleep, our toes touching, my hand like in my favorite thing is like to wrap my fingers in your hair.
Yeah.
Like it makes me feel safe. It's definitely like a safe and secure thing.
So again, you're like reading my mind a little bit.
I'm sorry for jumping ahead.
No. You were jumping like way ahead, and maybe it's because I told you about a lot of my ideas ahead. So
no, you
next
didn't.
time I'm
this
not
is
telling
all
you.
brand new to me. It's all. I forget everything. I have no idea.
But I think that if I were to write down, like, okay, what are the things that feel like love to me, right? Like that, I think that would have been one of them, right?
What's that?
Like safety
and feeling secure.
Safety.
Yeah.
Just I need to, in order to even be able to open myself up to love.
Right. And
I need to feel safe.
To revisit a topic from one of our past episodes when we were thinking about attachment styles, like for somebody like me who was raised very insecurely attached, like there are a few things more comforting to me than to be able to like feel that secure attachment physically as a legitimate real thing.
Yes.
And then it reinforces my secure attachment with you because when I need the physical reassurance, it's there.
Right. And I guess that's part of it, right? It's like we do actually have real tried and true studies on things like attachment.
Right.
We know that it's not I'm American, you're Chinese. Like we are human, and therefore humans have certain needs for touch.
Right.
We know that. So this is where I want to kind of segue to like Dr. Gary Chapman.
Who's Dr. Gary Chapman?
Yeah. Well, the writer of the 5 languages.
Okay. Which,
as we know, it's a sensation. Like this is a sensational book.
We just had the 30th anniversary of it, right?
I believe so. Yeah. And so I think like I want to credit, like give a little bit of credit to 2 other podcasts that I'm going to mention throughout this. One is if Books Could Kill. Did a podcast episode on this book as well, and then
and thanks Ray for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and then also Honey Do Me podcast also had another person that we'll talk about later down the road, who's done the modern love languages,
and that's a sex positivity podcast, right?
Yeah, it is.
Honey Do Me.
Yes, Honey Do Me. And we'll include that information in the notes for folks if they want to look deeper, do more work. And so, but what I wanted to say is Dr. Chapman. So the first thing is like you have that DR, in front of that name.
Right.
So it's like right away, right? Like this, if you look into like social psychology,
Mm-hmm.
we are programmed
Yep.
to respect people in certain roles in our society.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got that doctor, like right away, I'm disarmed, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm assuming that if this man's doing this work, he's a doctor, he's got some credentials to do this. So I'm disarmed. So I'm like, cool. Well, his PhD is actually in religious education from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Okay.
His earlier studies were in anthropology from Wake Forest, and so he is a studied man. But it comes from a religious school, so he does not have a background in psychology or in therapy
Or couples
necessarily. And so
right. And I think, I'm sorry to cut you off. I apologize, but that's not to say that religious people
exactly
can be counselors to married couples within their congregations. Like I don't think that either of us want to like discount that as a very powerful role.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying is that I think what we do have to be aware of is when we're generalizing from the population that we serve to all of society at large, right? And like what that sample size look like, what the original things that were being said in the book and how the book has changed, and also then what are the societal constructs under which we live that impact how successful that book is, and what else are we not looking at in terms of the harm that it creates or that it has created. And so at last count, the book had been translated into 50 languages. In fact, I have the book in Spanish. I've never actually read it. So because that's what most people do. Most people don't read the book. Thank God.
Right.
For the thank you. I think that's particularly funny in the context of this man to be thanking the gods here. But it has sold 20 million copies at last count.
Right. Of all the bajillion people on social media who have mentioned their love languages, how many have read the book?
Not very many. I mean, I don't have statistics on that or anything.
Right. That was a rhetorical question.
I didn't. No, that would be some deep research there. No, we're not doing the stats thing on this show. I'm not doing that. I mean, I'll give you. I'll cite my sources, for you. But
right.
But what I think some people may be surprised by is that the book itself dates back to 1992. So, it's like 32 years old now.
Right.
And since then he has also gone to create several variations on that original theme. And so love languages for the workplace, love languages of teens, stuff like that.
Right. So you take this already pretty very simple framework and you just like splice it into all of these different contexts.
Yes.
And it just works.
Oh man, I have a market now. If I can get parents, like if parents are already using this for their marriage, now they can like apply it.
And all relationships are the same. You can just apply it to every relationship, every partnership, it just works.
Yes. So, and I think that really speaks to how love starved we are. And also, the strength and beauty in that is seeing how badly people actually want to connect. Right. They want to connect. They want to succeed. They don't want to be alone. They don't want others not to feel loved by them, and they don't want to not feel loved. And so that's real, right? That's there.
And I can, and in the positive spin of this, right? You can see, you can, if you're a person who is dating, but you might be socially awkward, or you might have difficulty communicating, or you're shy, whatever the personality quirk or trait might be, that makes sort of getting your needs across, whatever that barrier is. If you have a tool set, like to say, hey,
Yes.
Before we get too deep into this, let's check our compatibilities. Like my primary love language, I'm not a touchy-feely person. This is not me
Yes.
specifically, but like
Yes.
whereas a lot of people when they're first meeting each other, they want to be
You're right.
touchy-feely, and so that could be an immediate way to like both either connect or to sort of say, okay, cool, this is not going to work out. Let's not waste each other's time.
Yes.
So I see the draw of it. I see the appeal of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I do. It's like almost like shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, it can be so much more complicated than that, right?
Right.
Like, for example, I have a demi style
Mhm.
of attraction in terms of my sexual drive. So I have to feel like there's already an emotional connection in order to feel like I would even want to have like sexual intimacy
Mhm.
with other people. And so where I fall on that spectrum is going to sort of inform how these love languages are applied.
Right.
Right? So in that way, it might seem like maybe physical touch is lower on my list.
Right.
But it's lower only for a certain time period.
Right, exactly.
With certain
Because
people.
both of us have that sort of demi tendency.
Yeah.
So people, if we're hypothetically dating, people could be like, this person is not into me because they don't like do anything.
Yeah.
But we're both like
being really respectful and
right,
taking things slow.
Right. No, we're just like, I just don't know you yet. And like, I don't know if we have that connection. So like, we're just,
I don't know if you're a psychopath.
Right, exactly. So yeah, being able to, and so I think what I'm hearing you, and I want you to continue, but like it's a good place to start, but then it's complicated. It's not just like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a physical person. It's that I'm physical once I reach a certain emotional connection or a certain emotional security or safety.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden my love language might shift or change.
Yeah.
Because the love languages that I want with my friends might be different, or
Yes.
with specific people might be
Yes.
different. So it's not always a universal thing necessarily.
And also, right, I am touchy-feely with my friends and with anybody who I really care about, but touchy-feely in other ways.
Right.
That don't necessarily like involve, okay, that's it, I'm ready to go.
Right.
Let's do this. No, so I think, if when somebody says that their love language is physical, is it just sex, or is it all of the spectrum of
Mhm.
touch, right? Like you would be just as happy if I held your hand walking down the street,
Right.
because then that's important, right? Because then I have a lot of different ways that I can show you love, versus if this is being utilized to justify, which is what some of the red flags for me with this book.
Yeah.
Right? That it's used to justify patriarchal systems.
Right.
And so, right off the bat, the original version of the book had problematic sexist language and concepts that have actually since been amended.
Mm.
So depending on what version of the book you get some pretty messed up anecdotes.
But I wonder this, and again, I'm not expecting you to actually have data, but
Mhm.
I'm curious how many people are still like operating under love languages like 1.0,
Well, it came out in the newer versions came out in 2015. So
Mm.
basically, if you have a copy of the earlier versions, you'd
Yeah.
have one, and my understanding too, I think, is that it's been amended more than once, but people tend to say like the 2015 version is what they'll say.
Mhm.
If you have, what do you have? Do you have a 2015 or before kind of thing?
Because
Yeah, the before times.
the before time.
There was specifically an anecdote about a woman who was very clearly in an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
and so like trigger warning around that, like just, and one of the things that he was suggesting, and this is why marriage, like religious marriage therapy, is severely frowned upon in the therapy world, is that so many people without training essentially were maintaining the status quo kind of bro code
Right.
by encouraging mostly femmes and women that were being abused in these relationships to stay in them, and then also to kind of like switch their behavior to appease
Mm-hmm.
the abusive spouse.
So if I can sort of extrapolate a little bit there and make some predictions, it sounds as if the physical intimacy, touch, love language is often associated with the male husband partner,
Yes.
and the acts of service often gets associated with femme partners.
Yes.
And then thus when the man is feeling a need for sex, it is the woman's service job
Yes.
to perform.
Essentially.
Okay.
Essentially. Yeah. And so I think that, a mass criticism of his work is that it does cater to a Christian Baptist cis heteronormative
Right.
population, and it was based on those relationships
Mhm.
that he was kind of coming up with this system of love languages.
Right.
And in that particular anecdote, he encourages the woman to essentially start spontaneously engaging sex with her husband
Okay.
as the fix for the problems in their marriage, because that is his love language.
That's his love language.
Yeah,
So it's not his fault that he's
that
extremely
he's a douche the rest of the time.
right. If he's a jerk, you just need to perform.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where that might be problematic.
Yeah, and it's there's that, there's capitalism at the helm too, right? And so I will say that there have been some meager but attempts at sort of studying the validity of the love languages. There are very few again, and it isn't, but the book itself is not based on science, but on those anecdotes from conservative marriage counseling sessions. And he also cites the Bible and approaches relationships from that lens, from sort of like stories from, which again, of an even much older text.
Sure.
To base our gender relations
Right. That's
on,
yeah.
From halfway across the world on the other side of the globe.
Right.
When we think about it too, geographically.
So it's definitely like hewing to very 20 or early mid 20th century
Yes.
heteronormative patriarchal sort of stuff. Like that's it. That's the foundation.
Yeah. And a lot of the anecdotes kind of have this theme of, I told him what to do, and voila. And half of the time it was just actually saying things like, oh, so your wife is telling you that you don't spend enough time with her, so start spending some time with her. And oh my God, doctor, you saved our marriage. And so it was like so also the men needed a man to give them permission to listen to their wives.
Right. Because
they couldn't just listen to their
wives. Wife hadn't been, yeah.
And it was like, okay, so you're going to credit somebody else for the labor that I've been doing for the last 10 years as our marriage was kind of falling apart.
Right. This is that very problematic, very toxic masculine needing another man to say that it's okay before it's okay sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please ask.
Because
away.
Neither of us really. So we're both members of like soft science professions, like and these are I'm using very loaded language.
So anecdotes themselves are not bad.
Right, and
we learn a lot.
Eva's a therapist, a social worker, a psychologist. I'm an educator, but we're professionals. Like there's licensures. The point of what I'm trying to say is that like we're not saying that that data is everything, that science is everything, that research is everything, that sometimes like feeling something is
Yep.
is real.
Yeah.
But it is also saying that there is actual research that happens with behavioral science.
Yes. And
Like-
yes.
Like there are observable qualities with like what we were talking about with physical touch and the release of oxytocin and the biological markers that go along with these behaviors, or the very well established research into attachment styles. Like these are ideas that are sort of vetted.
Or even erase that and just think about if we want to take it further back, right? Because this is the lens that I wanted to kind of apply to this today is how do we look at this from a decolonial
Yeah.
way? How do we deconstruct it further, right?
Mhm.
And so even indigenous ways of knowing that are not vetted as scientific,
Sure.
they are scientific.
They are. Yeah.
It's just indigenous science,
Mhm.
right? And so like what we call like that's the problem, right? Is the language
Mm-hmm.
and what we start to do with language to create new systems of thought and to privatize them
Right.
and to put our stamp on them and then to mass produce and sell them.
And I think you're labeling it exactly, because what we would call indigenous knowledge and indigenous science is traditions passed down
Mm-hmm.
through experience from generation to generation. And it's based upon observations that are repeated and measured over time,
Yes.
which is science.
It is science.
So
right.
like I'm trying to not use the scientific language, because I agree with you, because what happens is once you professionalize and make
Yes.
everything scientific, it does start falling into that colonial and especially patriarchal systems.
Mm-hmm.
So you just described it perfectly. You have a wife who very clearly states that their marriage is not going well for
Mm-hmm.
X, Y, and Z. She has stated it. There are stated problems
Mm-hmm.
and obviously ways to fix them that are pretty straightforward. And it's only until this third party man, authority figure in the church, puts formalized language
Mm-hmm.
on top of it
Yeah.
and labels it, packages it
Mm-hmm.
using the exact language that the woman has probably used.
Yeah.
Like, I really value when my husband or my partner, whoever,
Spends time with me.
spends time with me.
It's the same thing. Yes.
Right. Or when my partner comes home and like takes a few minutes to recognize the work that I've done. Because
Yes.
these are housewives probably.
Yeah, they were the majority. Yes.
That sort of
Yes.
words of affirmation, like, holy crap, this house looks amazing. Like, this must have been a lot of work today. Thank you so much. Or comes home and says, it just asked me about my day.
Yeah.
Or any of these sort of things. But no, like, it's been packaged and wrapped up, and that's the solution.
Mhm.
Right. And that's exactly what happens, what you're talking about, how indigenous knowledge gets colonized.
Yeah.
Because it gets packaged and it gets
Repackaged. Yeah.
repackaged. Yeah. I'm sorry to
And then it's called something. Yeah.
It's the 5 love languages.
So we don't have to call like why do we have to label everything that we I mean like it's good, right? But maybe it's just community.
Mm-hmm.
Like community itself just encompasses all of that for me.
Right.
Like community is love.
Right.
Community is where you go, what you call home, what
Mhm.
what holds you.
Right.
So, whoever your community is, whoever your family is, and we don't necessarily want to put out there like, colonizing language around like tribalism. So like, but I'll hear people say that too, like who your tribe is,
Mm-hmm.
and so that sometimes that term can be
Sure.
inappropriate to use. And so, but we're home, what feels like home
Mm-hmm.
to you. And so, yeah, what about the science?
What about the science?
What science?
Right.
What science? The book is pretty transparent about that, about the origins of the theoretical framework. So it's actually for people who actually read it, which most of us don't, right? Most of us go to the little quiz. We take the
Mhm.
quiz,
Mm-hmm.
and voila, we now have
My
We
love
have-
languages are blah blah blah.
Let's have a couples meeting.
Right.
Let's talk about it in our next therapy session.
Right. Or just post it on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, just post it so people know from now on that this is what I need. This is what you gotta give me. There have been a few related studies that I think we could talk about. There was like a Berkeley University study, largely inconclusive, but tended actually toward refuting the love languages rather than endorsing them, but also because it started to find trends for surprise other love languages that were unaccounted for.
Nuh-uh.
Yes.
You mean there's not just 5 ways to express love for somebody?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And so because they were kind of like, oh crap, there's like emerging like love languages that we don't even know where to, and it also just putting different things that people were describing into the categories was categorically difficult.
Yes.
Like it was challenging. So they were looking at that and they were like, yeah, nah, not so much. Yeah. But then of course, like, folks see these and they're like, ooh, this guy's making the big bucks.
Sure.
Right. So like, how do we make the big bucks? And so everybody wants to get on that love languages train. So, choo-choo. So there was a lot of criticism for a example of the work, but now people are like, how do I take this and rebrand it myself and repackage it? And so the universities did most of that research that we just talked about. So then they're of course studying on they're focusing on a student body, which is also you're not able to generalize out to the regular population. And so you then enter like this competition of the dating market, kind of dating world, stuff. And
because the behaviors of younger post-adolescent early adults are not exactly behaving the same way as like married couples, I'm assuming.
Exactly, because most of them are not married. So,
Right.
And so it's different, right? Because it's like, okay, cool. Well, people are also marrying later. So what do these supposed love languages look like when you're, and that was kind of the same thing he was doing, right? Like love languages for your kids, love languages. And so you have Truity, who wants to capitalize on conducting their own more diverse study and also kind of throwing in LGBTQ couples for more gender expansive like definitions of like love and that kind of thing. And so the result was a broadening and a rebranding of basically the 5 love languages, except they called it the 7 love styles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Styles.
And I don't know the styles. I didn't, I was like, what? That's it. I'm the, I'm like, okay. So love styles, if you want to look it up, their test is available online for free.
Right.
With a 10-page detailed report that you can opt to pay for.
Okay.
Which actually is probably where the meat of like what their
and
theories
who's this
are.
from again?
Truity. Yeah.
So we have 5 love languages and 7 love styles.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we also have Dr. Anne Hottership and her modern love languages.
Okay.
18 of them.
And so I listened to this you shared with me on the Honey Do Me party. She's adding more.
She is adding more.
She's going to add more.
She was already talking that there's already an emerging 19.
An emerging, okay.
Oh yeah, how long can you keep this going?
Let me tell you, as long as people are paying, that's how.
And so that was the thing. So I listened to the podcast too, because I wanted to try to catch, okay, well, what are your 18 categories to try to kind of be able to give our viewers the information. And no, it's like it's hidden behind paywall. So and I will say it's not like super expensive.
Right.
But it's like pay for the PDF files and you'll get them, and they're protected and whatnot.
People should be paid for their work, right?
Absolutely.
And we get that. And she's a therapist and and she's doing
and
work with couples, and so like
she's a queer woman or queer femme.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the stuff that she's doing is good. And it is more expensive and more representative of the diversity of different types of relationships. So all of that is good.
Yes.
And, it's behind a paywall still.
Yeah, it's behind a paywall, and I understand, wanting to make a living, needing to make a living. And I also still see how some of it would not feel applicable to me as a woman of color.
Okay.
Right. So I think that there are differences there. And also if you're kind of, again, expanding out your lens on what love looks like, feels like, from a more decolonial lens. So, but for those folks who maybe want to learn more, Dr. Ann Hoddership, it's the Modern Love Languages. And we did learn about them from the shout out, Honey Do Me podcast. And so gratitude for them for inviting her. And that's episode 118 if you want to check it out. And Dr. Hoddership's pronouns are her there. So if we use it, we may use those interchangeably as we talk about their work. But I will say that the other thing that right away kind of stands out for me is that their work I hadn't heard about at all.
No,
and
because
so
everybody knows the five.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
And so I do kind of want to highlight when there are opportunities for us to lean into and support the work of others who are not being heard, who are not being seen in quite the same way. And so they do run an organization called Everyone Deserves Sex Ed. And we know that that's something that's under constant attack right now.
Absolutely.
Especially in our state. And so there, anyone who's trying to do that kind of work right now, like just like hats off, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you can check her out. And the podcast Honey Do Me is also available on most forms, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen. So kind of want to just highlight some of the things from her work. And some of it was already what we've talked about, just like the criticisms of the patriarchal notions, sort of outlining the original 5 languages. And then emphasizing that physical, but also heteronormative relationships. There was a comment. I believe it was a comment thread where Chapman was being asked questions about queer folks that also made it pretty clear that this was not for that population, in not so nice terms.
Okay, was this the like we love them?
Yes. It was a mom asking for help and support with a queer child.
Yeah. We obviously we love our children, but we mourn them as because they're going to hell anyways. Like that sort of
that was very much the feel of it, and I was hoping that that you would remember how because it was sort of mind blowing. And that was sort of
my way of showing love is mourning that you're going to hell. It's bad.
Yeah, like I care about you, but this
you're
is
damned.
wrong,
and you're damned.
Yeah. It was hard. It was hard to kind of it's hard to ignore those things when you
what
see
love
those
language
things.
is that, I wonder? Like is that accounted for?
No. It's like some kind of religious love language.
And I'm like I don't want to. I'm not specifically bashing the religious aspect of that. I'm bashing the hateful aspect of it. And so I do want to draw that distinction.
Yeah. I mean, but I think you can weaponize anything, right? And so I think that's kind of one of the sticking points for me is how do we, when we give people tools, right? They're tools. They're not weapons. They're not meant to be yielded to prove somebody else is not as dedicated as you,
right?
That sort of thing.
Because I wonder if there are, there are still gender codes in place around these behaviors. So, I would assume that there's a risk for a woman who identifies, one of, a femme person identifying as having a very specifically like sexual physical touch as a primary love language or as their love language, being slut shamed.
Yes.
Whereas if a man says that, it's just normal. Like of course it's normal.
Oh, in Chapman's book, those women do not exist.
They
by
don't.
The way.
No.
No, we do not exist, ladies.
Oh.
You can forget cunnilingus as a love language here.
That's unfortunate.
I know. I am so bummed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at the conditions that create, right, the society that we live in, we keep recreating scarcity, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, and the scarcity that they create, and then how it keeps us sort of competing with one another rather than connecting. And so that's hard to turn off.
Sure.
Even as you're trying to connect.
Yeah.
You know, and so it creates a culture of just like, again, love-starved people who turn to whatever is accessible for a sense of intimacy, or if you can't at least get intimacy, then pleasure. You know?
Yeah.
And I think you talked about it a little bit earlier, like being that like sort of endorphin, oxytocin, like withdrawal.
Yeah.
You know, and so if we can find something that mimics it, you know, then this is where coping with the pain of not having access comes in.
And I think this is coming into something you keep referring to, and I don't know if we've specifically, not that we're very much advocating against specific definitions and terminology, but decolonizing is a very, on one hand, it's a catchword that gets used a lot in progressive social media and all of that sort of thing, but it's also a very important thing. So can you talk about what decolonizing is, just as a general idea?
Yes, I think we can't. So I think part of it is that we can't ignore that even if we, let's say, give the land back. Let's give land back, right? Like even if we gave land back, we've changed land in irreparable ways, right? We can hope for the healing of land, and the land will heal. It heals all the time, you know, especially when we give it time to. However, the land remains changed. Land changes with us, right? And we change with it. And so when we talk about decolonization, really what we're talking about is changing us, changing our relationship to being here, to being where we are. And, you know, there's a lot we can't go back and undo, but there is still a lot that we can do. And a lot of it has to do with honoring the original stewards of land. You know, I think I wrote it, and I will talk a little bit in each of the types of love languages, but when we talk about the original harm, the original act of hate, right? Because when we're talking, we can't talk about love without really talking about hate too. And what we hate is what we don't understand, what we don't relate to, what we deem inhuman, the other, whoever we are able to label the other. And to take stuff that isn't yours requires that. Requires for you to see people as no longer human. To take the most fanatical examples of human behavior that you can and say, that is you. You are this. You know, and
then
so
plant that flag.
Yeah, and then plant your flag. And so, you know, we're both of us are mixed to all get out. I think the majority of Latina populations are, whether they like to admit it or not. And we've done, you know, our histories of erasure of our indigenous and Afro roots run deep, and which is why every chance I get, I try to challenge, and I talk about the parts of my heritage that are mixed. And Paco too, and I think you've kind of adopted that now as well. What it looks like to be a person who, there are two terms I think that come up a lot around that, like white passing and white appearing, which are different, right? When you're a mixed person, you are white appearing, but you're not necessarily white passing. White passing is what you do to survive in white society,
Right.
And it's a choice. It's a choice to live that way. That was something people did for safety.
Yep.
Now white passing gets thrown around like a slur as well. Oh, you're white passing, so therefore you have more privilege. So therefore you're not like you think you're better than me, and while holding that does come from a place of truth, right? It comes from a place of where colorism is a reality in our communities, where being, lighter skin affords you benefit. So all of that is true. So what does that have to do with love, right?
Well, and again, I think it's important that we understand as a foundation of our conversations, which I think this is, if we're going to have a through line for everything that we've talked about, it decolonizing is sort of like the through line that even is built into our relationship.
Yeah.
And by our, I mean people who live under capitalism, whatever your gender or your relationship style, we're still sort of living in a world that functions in a binary fashion. And when we were first courting and forming our relationship, we I asked you to marry me like a couple of weeks into our relationship, as a romantic thing, and I meant it, but also not grasping how much of a figurative flag I was planting on you.
If that was today, I
Right?
would be like red flag, red flag, red flag. Yeah.
And that's what that is, right? That ring on your finger, that saying that you're engaged.
It's your flag.
It's my flag. And vice versa. Like my wedding band, they are indicators of property ownership.
Yes.
And so we still wear our rings but with very different mindsets now.
Yeah.
And so what I think I'm just speaking to this, and
sometimes we don't.
And sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there's any more or less commitment to one another at any given time. It's a complex symbol.
Yeah.
And so I'm speaking to this at length, and I'm sorry, but I think it speaks to where we're coming from with these conversations and with this mindset of decolonizing. It's decoupling ourselves from all aspects of the colonial mindset, which is ownership, which is categorizing, as you're stating, the acceptable people and the acceptable behaviors from the alien and the foreign. And ultimately, those are determined by just things that we find distasteful or uncomfortable or whatever. And really challenging that everywhere we can, including how we use language to express how we both want and express our love for each other.
Yeah.
Both you and me specifically, and people in general.
Yeah. Right. And I think, growing up in the cultural context of America does shape the acceptable ways of expressing or not expressing love too. And so, where you grow up geographically is going to have an impact on how you express love.
That's it for this first part of our conversation about love languages. Thanks for listening. In the next segments, Eva will examine each of the 5 love languages through a decolonial lens, exploring their value as a functional interpersonal shorthand, but also their potential to reinforce harmful and even dangerous patterns. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, feel free to share them with either of us via social media, email them to finlos@finloslives.com, or you can leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app finloslives.com. If you enjoyed this content, we hope you'll share the podcast. We look forward to our next conversation.